Okay. So my last index of. So first I will say const my last index of is going to be equal to a function. And I'm going to write that function like that. Okay? Get used to seeing things written like this, okay? It's literally the same thing as writing, not literally the same thing. There is a small difference that you don't have to know about right now, but this is another way to write a function, okay? So, let's think about what my last index of is actually doing. It's returning the last index of an element you're searching for, right? And just like index of, there is also a starting point. So if you read the examples of the workshop, the workshop gives you examples like this input would give you this input will give you this input will give you this. There was an example where it said the start index would be at 2, but it was actually going backwards. It wasn't saying start here and then go forwards. Because that's what my last index of is doing. It is starting at the back of the array, which makes sense. If you're looking for the last thing, you just want to start at the end and return the first thing you find, right? So that will be the logic that we will be implementing in this solution, okay? It's pretty much the same as writing the my index of, except the loop is going to be a little different, okay? So I can So this thing is going to take an array, and I'll call it ARR, and it'll take a search value, I'll call it val, and it'll take a start index, and I'll call it start. So I can say if start is equal to undefined, I can just say start is going to be equal to what? Where do we want to start if the start index is never given to us? The last index of the array. Because if we're looking for the last index of this element, we could just start from the back automatically, right? So we can say start will be equal to r.length minus 1. So this will give us the last element. And I could do that, or I can do this. Start equals r.length minus 1. That is the same thing. This is saying if start was never passed in, assign start this value. This is ES6, okay? And I think that this is more clean. If the value is something like this, if it's not a complex, if there's not a lot more JavaScript to write, okay? Any questions on this? Yeah. Yes. So maybe this, yeah, that's true. So, but we are assuming that an array will always be inputted into this function.
So before the call of this function, we have to make sure that the array is not random every function.
Say that again?
So before the call of the function, my last index of, we have to ensure that array is not random.
No, you don't have to make that check. If you were writing like a serious function where anybody can do anything, then yeah, you would have to check for every value that could be possibly passed in. But this function is saying we're going to give you an array, we're going to give you a value, look for the last index. That's all you have to worry about. Because honestly, you could be thinking of edge cases. We call those edge cases, right? Like, oh, okay, but what if I pass in false, You don't have to think about edge cases. Just think about what the question's asking you to do literally, okay? Sorry, there's no AC. There's nothing I could do about that. So, if the start index is not passed in, we're just going to assign it to the length of that array minus 1. Okay? So now, we can do a for loop, right? And we could say let I equal to start. Right? Because we are going to be looping backwards. So if start is going to be this, or whatever it is they give us, we are going to loop from that point and decrement. We're not going to start at 0. I feel like some of you guys have gotten into the habit of always writing a for loop and always starting at 0. Okay? Before you automatically and robotically just write your for loop, think about what the best way to do it would be. So now we're changing the logic of the for loop definition, right? So we start here, and we go until I is greater than or equal to 0, and then we decrement I every time. We do greater or equal than here because we need the 0th index. And arrays, like strings, their first element is at the 0th index. So we need to include 0. We need I to be 0. Then we decrement I at the end of the loop, and then I is -1, and this statement breaks. Does everyone agree? Okay. So now we can say if R, right, the array at I is triple equals to val, return I. You can write an if statement like this as well. You don't really need the curly braces if the thing inside of the if statement is one line. Okay? So I can write it like this as well. I don't need the braces because it's only one line, right? I'm just saying return I. But I will do the curly braces just to make you guys feel better. We're starting from the back or from wherever they're telling us to start, going that way. If the array was here, we're going this way, right? And once we check the array at this index, array at I, right? This is like the same thing you would do if you were checking a character of a string, right? String at I, except now it's array at I. It works the same way. And we check and see if that's the value that we passed in. And then we just return I, because we're not looking for the value. We have the value. That's being inputted into the function, right? The search value. What we're looking for is the index. So we could just return this index. So if this statement ever runs, the for loop will stop, and so will the function. And we get a value. So let's say there is no value that matches whatever we're passing in. That means we want to loop through the entire thing. And then after the for loop is done, if we made it, we checked every element in the array and we made it, we just return -1. That is a very short and clean solution, right? Not that many lines of code. And I keep seeing people doing this. Oh, shit. What would happen if I did this? Say that again?
Wouldn't that return -1 until it finds it?
No, it would check the first element we're looking at, right?
Oh,
If it is, we return that index and the function stops. Else, if it's not what we're looking for, it just returns -1 and we don't check the array anymore. So if we're ever writing, like, if you're ever thinking in your head, like, okay, like we have to return this thing if we find it, and if we don't, we return something else. You don't put that in the for loop, okay? Because this logic, if this if statement isn't true and you have an else, if the if statement isn't true, the else will always run. Do you guys agree? If this is not true, else do this, right? So if we hit this return -1 and I is still at start, we're never going to hit the rest of the array. We're just looking at one element, right? So this has to go outside of the for loop. We want everything to do. We want the for loop to stop. We want it to hit every single element, check every single element. Then we return -1 if it's not there. Any questions? Did I make this seem easier than it was yesterday? Yeah, right? It's rough. It's rough. This is, see, like, I feel like for beginners, the problem is always more difficult if you have to change the definition of the for loop. because you're so used to doing let I equals 0, I is less than array.length or string.length, and just go in the beginning and count everything, right? But you see this way, it's different. Is anybody confused? Should I do unshift? Okay, cool. Thank you for the permission. I'm just kidding. Okay, so const, what is it? My unshift. So what is this doing? So this is going to take the array, right? And then it's going to take the value that you want to put at the beginning of the array, right? So how do we do this? This one actually isn't as difficult as it seems, right? So what we can do, you can say let results are, and you could set that equal to an empty array, right? Then you can write your for loop just like you guys like to write it. For I, let I equals 0. I is less than r.length. I plus plus. So we know unshift puts something in to the front of the array, right? So that means that if we are saying that this is an empty array, we want to put in this value first before we put everything else back in, right? Right? That's what we want to do, right? So, how do we know if we're at the first element of the array? If I is 0, right? If I is equal to 0. Before I write any other logic, first I check if I is 0. Then I do results are dot push val. No else. Do you know why? Because if I is 0, we only want this val to go into this array at like before we do anything else. But we still want the first thing that's at the first index of this array. We still want that to go into here, right? So after that, we can just do result r dot push r of I. Then after the for loop, we could just return result r. Does this make sense? First, we run this check every time in the for loop, but it's only going to be true once, right at the beginning of the for loop. So at the beginning of the for loop, this is empty. So we're just going to push that value into there, right? And push puts everything to the back. So the first time, we put that there, and then we put the first element at the input array into result array. And then we just loop through it like we usually do and put everything else into the back. So then the value will be at the front. Another way to do this is to just do that and not even make that check at all. Because what I'm saying is result array is now going to be equal to an array with val inside of it. Whatever val is, it's just going to be array, and the 0th index, the first element, will be whatever value is. So results array, now we're just pushing everything into that, right? But there is something already at index 0. Do both solutions make sense? Who has questions? Seriously. Let me know if you have questions. You sure? Okay. Okay. Done. Done with last night's problems. So today, we're going to be learning more about arrays, okay? So today, I'm going to teach you guys some more methods. And what else am I going to teach you guys? I don't even know, honestly. And then, right. I'm going to teach you guys some more methods, and then I'm going to show you nested arrays and how to really use them and get past them, get through them, right? So, the first method, the new method I want to show you guys is dot splice. Not slice, dot splice, okay? With a P before the L. Splice, okay? Splice and slice are completely different methods. They do completely different things. Like slice, it does take 3 arguments, okay? And the third one being optional. But it could also take more than that, okay? It could also take more than 3. The first 2 are required, but everything else is optional, okay? So, the first argument will be where to start, right? Just like slice, it's where to start. The second argument will be how many things you want to delete. And the third thing will be optional, what to add in that place. And the return value will be the spliced out elements in array form. Let me show you an example of what I mean, okay? So let's say I have an array of hobbits, right? And that's going to be Frodo. It's going to be Sam. It's going to be Merry. And it's going to be Pippin. Goddamn. Okay. So now I'm going to say let deleted hobbit. We're going to delete a hobbit. Which one do you guys want me to delete? Merry? Bye, Merry. Equal to hobbits dot splice, right? Sort of like, it's like the same format as slice, the same format as any other method, right? Dot splice, open parentheses, okay? Don't forget that. And then the first element is going to be where to start. 0, 1, 2. We are going to start at 2, okay? Index 2. 2. How many things should we delete? 1. And then I will show you console.log hobbits. Then I will show you console.log deleted hobbit. And as you can see, hobbits was changed. Splice actually mutates the original array, unlike slice. Slice makes a copy of the array and leaves the original array alone. Splice deletes that thing from the actual array and returns an array with that value there. Does everyone understand? Does anyone have any questions about the basic usage of splice? Yeah.
So what are the rules for putting the like coordinates in the parentheses? So 2 is I get that that's like the one that you want to select.
It's the index of where to start.
Then the 1 is how many
things you want to delete.
But
So
if you put,
what?
if you put 2 there, like Q2, then what would happen?
Then I get 2 things out of the array. I'm saying start at index 2, right?
Yeah.
If I say start at index 2, 0, 1, 2, we're starting at Merry, right?
Oh,
And the second
okay.
argument is this 2, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to delete 1, where we started, and then we're going to delete another one.
So if you put like 2, 3, would it
2,
change anything, or would it say undefined or something? Or
2, 200 returns the same thing.
yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Also, if I say 200, 200, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Because you're not telling it to start at a place that exists. So it just does nothing to the array, but it does return an empty array. It still returns something, right? It always returns an array with the things that were deleted from the original array. And since nothing was deleted, because we're starting at index 200 and deleting 200 things, we just get an empty array, because nothing was actually removed from Hobbits. But I did mention that there is a third optional argument, right? So let's say I did Hobbits, I'll start at 1. No, I'll start at 0. I'll take out one thing, and I'll pass in Bilbo. So now, I started at 0, which is Frodo. I took it out, and since there's a third element, now there's a third element, I'm replacing that with Bilbo. I'm putting Bilbo where Frodo was, and I'm still getting Frodo as the value of deleted Hobbit. And I can pass in as many as I want. And it puts it at the start index, right? It takes everything in the order you put it and puts it where the start index is, okay? Then it deletes everything, and then it deletes everything. So if I did like 1 to 2, and I deleted 2 elements, Frodo and Sam would be gone, but Bilbo and Smeagol are still in front. Does this make sense? The third argument is optional. Yeah.
You started it at 3, and you delete 1, let's say Pippin, and then you added Bilbo and Smeagol, it'll start at 3, that's where we'll put them?
Yes. So you see you have Frodo, Sam, Merry. We deleted Pippin. We're starting at index 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. Got rid of it. And then we're putting Bilbo and Smeagol here at the end. Because that was where it was, right? Yeah.
What if, like you had an array that was just like enormous, had enormous amount of stuff in it, and you didn't know the exact number? Is there a way to like splice by, instead of using like 30, 1, you just type what you want to look for and take out? Or?
Yeah, so function. So okay, I need you guys to understand something. All of these things like to uppercase, .splice, .slice, .whatever, these are actually methods, right? They're called methods, right? Methods are functions. As a function argument, you can put an equation. You can do array.length divided by 2, round up, right? So you could start at the middle. Like that's an equation, right?
Yeah.
So you could do something like that. Or if like a different variable existed like that you were storing in your application, that was like the magic number, right? Like you wanted six items per page of an application, let's say. So then we would get that constant and just put it in there. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's like whatever you want, really. Okay. But like you can't put like false, because that's just a different type. But like if you put an equation that equates to a number, then yes, because this takes a number. It has to start at an index. That's how the function works.
All right.
So I'm showing you here, I'm saying start at index 30, delete 1, and put these 2. Again, we get an empty array because there is no index 30 and we're not deleting anything. But Bilbo and Smeagol are still put on the end. If you overshoot the array's length, it goes at the end if there's third or fourth argument. Any other questions on splice? It's different than slice because we're mutating the array. You can also say start at 2, right? 0, 1, 2. Delete nothing, right? You could pass 0 in here. So then we say 0, 1, 2 is Mary, but now at index 2, we're saying these two things should be. So index 2 is Bilbo and Smeagol, and Merry and Pippin get pushed back. Does that make sense? We're not deleting anything anymore. This could be 0. Don't do anything. Don't delete anything. Just add things at a certain space in the array. Splice could be very useful, but it also mutates the original array, so it could be very dangerous. Any questions on Splice? I will take the silence as a no. And I will show you a different thing. So what I'm going to show you right now, I don't know if we ever talked about it. I can't really remember. But did we talk about split? So split isn't an array method, it's a string method. So I'm just going to cover that right now. So dot split. Let's say I have let hobbits equal to one string, Frodo and Merry and Pippin and Sam. Okay? Does everyone agree that this is one value? This is just one string and it's a long sentence, right? So if I do console.log hobbits dot split, that value is now an array. It's in an array form, okay? This, what I just showed you, is pretty much useless, right? Because I just took the entire string and I just put it in an array. What's the point of that? Split takes some arguments. So let's say I just wanted the names here. I just wanted the names at each index in the array. I wanted multiple things in the array, and I wanted the names of these hobbits. Space and space. I pass in this string as an argument to split. And what we get is an array of Frodo, Merry, Pippin, Sam. I like to think whatever you pass into split is what it's splitting at, right? It goes and goes and goes. It looks for these characters. Space, A-N-D, space. It goes and goes and goes and goes. Space, A-N-D, space. It removes this and takes everything before it and puts it into the array at index 0. And then it keeps looking for that and that and that again. If I did split at AD and I misspelled it, I get the same thing as before, because it's looking for an exact match of whatever you're putting in, okay? This is a very useful way to do it. Let's say you were just you wanted to loop through sentences, loop through a sentence and get every word and change certain words. What you would do is just pass in a space, because you know that it's a regular sentence, right? A regular English sentence, and between words there are spaces. Those are different words, right? So if you just split on a space, you will get every word in an array form. Okay? And you see how useful split can be, right? So, let's say right? So this is going to give us the same thing as before, right? We're splitting on the space and space, right? So what if, okay, we took out characters, right? Basically, we took out characters, we went through the whole thing, took them out, put everything in between in an array of separate indexes, right? How do I make this back into one string? And this is where the join method comes in handy. So I can do let string of Hobbit names equal to array of hobbits dot join. However, be careful if you don't pass anything into join. Oh, I'm not console log. Oh, sorry. If you don't pass anything into join, you get these commas. The commas that are actually separating the indexes of the array. So how can we do something about this, right? How can we do something about this? You guys saw that split took an argument, right? Join also takes an argument. So join can take a space. So now, at each index, it's going to basically basically what join is doing is it's taking an empty string, adding whatever was at index 0 into that string, looking at what you put in the argument, adding that to the back of the string, then going forward and doing the same thing over and over again until you get to the last thing. It doesn't add this thing in the beginning of the string and the end of the string, right? And you could put anything in here, and you'll get this. Oh, I didn't put a space at the end, right? I got literally what I typed. You can put anything in there, and it will put it in between each index. Okay? Does that make sense? Does it? Did I lose anybody? Yeah.
Question. For split, if you had multiple things you wanted to take out, like in a sentence, like comma, periods, would you have to do a separate split for each one, or is there one way to pass it in as one argument? Like you removed and, but you also removed the comma, period.
I can't think of that off the top of my head. I don't think you could just like pass in. It has to be you have to pass in a string, right? So you can't like pass in an equation, like because you can write like if this dot includes any of these things, right? Then you would do that. But yeah, I don't think you could do that with split. Yeah, you can do this though. You can pass in. Let me comment this out for a second. Let me comment this back in. You can pass in an empty string, and what you get is an array with each character as an index. Okay? You can do that too. That might not be as straightforward and intuitive as like you would imagine. Like, oh, what happens if I put in an empty string? Like, oh, this happens. Like, I would never guess this. But like, this is what happens. It literally makes every single character in the string an index at the array if you pass in an empty string to split. What if I did let me just try something. I don't know if this is gonna work. Split on this. Oh, does it? I don't know. I don't really use that split. No. Okay.
No, like in dot split, it should be only one parameter comma. Then after the closing bracket, it should be only one parameter
Wait, like here? No, 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 no. Because if you dot off of anything, so dot split returns an array, and split is not an array function, right? So if you chain things off of this, the thing that comes after here has to be a method of what this is going to return. So this is going to return an array, right? So if I split, like, let me like go back. So no, you can't do the OR thing. That's just what I've never tried to do that before. So, and then I dot join a space. Oh, whoops. And I console log array of hobbits. This is a string. So you can chain it like that. You could split it off of the thing you want to get rid of, and then join it immediately right after. But you can't do dot split again because the return value of hobbits dot split is an array. So you can't do dot split of an array. It's not an array method. Split is a string method. Okay? Okay? But join takes an array and makes it a string.
You did dot split dot join dot split again at the new element and dot join again.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Yeah, that would work. That is like really bad time complexity though. Because think about how many times you're looping through one thing. This many, this, where you can do like a for loop and like filter out multiple characters with the dot includes off of this, right? Any questions on join? Join isn't that bad, right? Join and split are super useful, okay? Because sometimes you might come to the sense that arrays are actually easier to work with than strings. Okay? So you might want to just take a string and make it an array. And you could do that with dot split. You can make every character or base it off of the spaces if you know you're getting sentences. And then you could just join it back in and put like a space in between to make it a sentence again after you find what you're looking for or something like that. And I think if you just put an empty this, then you get a string of characters with no spaces. Does that make sense? Because you're saying I'm passing in an empty string to join. So I'm saying put nothing in between each of the indexes of the array. So what we get is just a string with everything clumped together. Any questions? It's hot in here. It's rough. Tank is full. I don't know what to do about that. And I don't want to break it.
No, just
What do you pull out?
put the water. When the water fills up, then I mean, yeah, it's a test.
Yeah, I gotta like bend my knees. No, I'll do it later. I'll do it after the lecture. Okay. So now I'm gonna show you one last method. It's actually pretty useful if you need to do it, and it's called .concat. So if you had let hobbits1 equal to Frodo and Sam, and you had let hobbits2 equal to what is it, Pippin and Merry. Should be Merry and Pippin. I don't know how I did that. But hobbits1, and then we could like console.log hobbits1 dot concat, and the thing you pass into concat is an array, okay? So I pass in hobbits2, and what I get is one array, okay? Concat takes two arrays and makes them one array. Whereas the thing you dot off of will be first, and the thing you pass into it will be at the end. So if I switch this to hobbits2 dot concat hobbits1, you get Pippin, Merry, Frodo, Sam, right? Does that make sense? This is concat. I feel like is very straightforward. You just like take this. It's kind of like a plus equals thing for arrays. You need a method for it. You could think of it like that, but don't because that's wrong. Okay? It's just like adding them together.
Does it mutate the array?
No, concat actually returns a new array. Because think about it, like you're not actually changing any values, right? What it's actually doing, concat, behind the scenes, is it's creating a new array that it's going to return, and then it loops through this, the thing you're dotting off of first, puts it into that, and then loops through the other one you pass and puts it into that.
Can you concat more than two?
Oh, like pass another thing to concat? I don't know. Let's check it out. Yes, you can. Concat takes multiple arguments. They have to be arrays though, right? If this was do they have to be arrays? Maybe I'm teaching you guys the wrong things. And this is why MDN is super useful, right? Because you could just go here and figure it out. Yeah, it's an array method. So the input, and/or values to concatenate into a new array. If all value and parameters are omitted, concat returns a shallow copy of existing array on which it is called. Interesting. So what if I did like concat false null? Oh, did I mess something up? Oh, yeah. Interesting. But you can pass in two arrays and it'll produce one array. Because what's the point of doing this? What's the point of passing in all these things if push does the exact same thing, right? But like what would happen if I did dot push hobbits 2? Oh, yeah. Duh. One, it mutates it. Oh, I'm doing hobbits. Oh, shit. If I'm pushing in hobbits 1 to hobbits 2, I'm getting an array, but the third element, the third element at the second index is actually going to be the entire array. It doesn't deconstruct the array and take the elements out, okay? Concat does, and it returns a copy. So right now, and then, because right now, hobbits 2 is changed forever. I mutated the original value. It's different now, okay? Concat does not do that. Concat just takes two arrays and adds them together. It also like puts things at the back of it if you wanted to use it like that. So concat is honestly super useful. Join is super useful too. Split, I mean splice, maybe. But splice is, I think, tricky to use well. If you know how to use it well, it could be extremely powerful, right? Because honestly, like when would you ever, like somebody said it before, like, yeah, you're right. When would you ever really need to take out like 3 things in the middle of a giant like heap of data, right? Probably not too often, but it can be useful for solving like smaller problems, okay? Any questions on any of these methods? Anything? Okay, cool. So, before I go into the slides, I will go over nested arrays. So, you could say let fellowship, right? So it's going to be equal to an empty array. So what if I had like each index? So I said before, yesterday, I said that arrays can hold any type of data, right? And that is true with holding other arrays, okay? So if I had this, then this, then this is an array of 3 arrays. And inside of those 3 arrays, there's nothing. So, what the hell? So a little like, in my opinion, I think the best practice of handling multiple two-dimensional arrays or nested arrays would be, if you know that you're going to define something like this, press enter like this, so you can see them all like that, okay? That makes it easier, because if these things had like multiple things inside of them, then it would be harder to see if they were all in one line, right? You guys get what I'm saying? Okay. So like, let's say fellowship will be Frodo, Pippin, Merry, and Sam. And then there's one dwarf, Gimli. There's one elf, Legolas. And there's one wizard, Gandalf. And then there's 2 men. Aragorn, did I spell it right? And Boromir. Rest in peace. So, as you can see, if I say console.log fellowship.length, what am I going to get?
5.
Huh? I'm going to get 5. Because the fellowship array at index 0 is just one array, okay? That array has a lot of things in it. It has 4 strings in it, but that's still one data type. That's still like one thing, right? That's one value, is one array. So at index 0, it's one array. At index 1, it's a string. 2 string, 3 string, 4, another array. So you get 5 as the length. So what if I wanted to loop through this array and display everything inside of all of the strings? What if I wanted to like console log all of the members of the fellowship, right? What do I do? So, let's put 5 here. I can write a for loop. And I can say let I equal 0. I is less than fellowship.length I plus plus. Oh god. Right? And I could just say console.log fellowship of I, right? There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing, right? Right, guys? Right? Guys? 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 No, because what I'm actually getting, I'll make this bigger, is I'm actually getting an array in the console, then three members, and then another array. So how can I possibly do this? Here is a trick. Not a trick, this is just how you do it. I don't know why I said it's a trick. So you could just say, how can you check if an element is an array? Array.isArray, right? If array.isArray of fellowship of I, right? What are we going to do? Loop through it again. So we do for let j equal 0. And I could do, okay, so if you remember scope, way back when, I could say let I again, right? No, I could. Because where I is being defined, it's inside of a different for loop. And let lets that happen, okay? However, if I was writing this function, and then like somebody else came up to me and was looking at what I'm going to reference in here, they would have absolutely no idea what I is what. I mean, I know that it's going to be referring to its own scope first, right? But that's just like confusing code, right? So usually when you're writing loops inside of each other, you want to change the indicator to a different letter if you're using letters, okay? Okay? So we do J, and then do the same thing, but J is now going to be less than fellowship at I dot length, right? Because fellowship at I is going to be an array if we ever reach this code. So then, and we do J++. And in here, we can console.log fellowship at I at J. And that's how you get a value inside of a nested array. We say, so let's say we're looking for Pippin, right? How do we get Pippin out of the array inside of an array called fellowship? Fellowship at 0. What is fellowship at 0? It's the array, right? So fellowship at 0 equals this array. So then you just put another bracket, 1. Fellowship at 0 at 1 gets you Pippin. And that's how you access things inside of arrays, okay? So if that's an array, do this. Else, console.log fellowship at I. And now we get everything, not in an array. Now we get everything. We get all of the values inside. Is anybody confused by what I just did? I know somebody's confused. Oh yeah? What are you confused about? Whole thing. Cool. So, we see that there's an array up here, right?
Yeah.
We see that at index 0, it's an array. Right? That's the 0th index, the first element. Then we have a string. Then we have a string. Oh, this is like a little... Then we have a string, and then a string, and then a string, and then another array, right? So if we wanted to get all of these elements inside of this array, because if we just console logged fellowship at 0, we would get the whole array, right?
Yeah, no, yes.
So fellowship at 0 is this array, right? So to get everything inside, we loop through fellowship, and we make an if statement check. If the current element is an array. If array.isArray, pass in the element. Because if it's not an array, if it's literally anything else, it's just going to return false, right? But if it's true, then we're going to do another for loop. And we are going to loop through that element and get everything inside of it. And we're telling this loop to stop when I is greater than that element's length. So this loop, when we hit index 0 of fellowship, I will be 0, J will be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then when it hits 4, it'll break out. And once it breaks out, it skips the else because it went into the if, and then I increments. And when I increments, we go to Gimli, and then to Legolas, and then Gandalf, and then I is going to be the last element in the array. And that element is an array, and this check passes again. So then, the for loop is defined again, so it's not like J is 4 still. This is a new instance of that loop. J is set back to 0. We're doing this again. So J will be 0, and then it will be 1. And then once it's changed to 2, that loop breaks. And we skip the else statement because we were in the if. But for Gimli, Legolas, and Gandalf, if those things were passed into array.isArray, that would be false, right? So then we go to the else and just console log what it is. Because it's not an array and we know it has a value. Does that make a little more sense? A little bit? We'll get there. Nested arrays are kind of like confusing to work with. But there are actually some real like structure, real like not data structure. I guess it's a data structure, right? Real data structures that are nested arrays. Can anybody think of an example? Can anybody think of an example? Something, you know, I don't really know why I expect you guys to answer that question. Why would you guys know? You know, a grid, right? A grid. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Oh fuck. 1, 2, 3. This looks like a grid, right? You know, your x and y coordinates, that nonsense from way back when. And that can be represented by a multi-dimensional array. And it's easy to see that if you do it this way, right? If I didn't, isn't this really annoying to look at? Right? Cool. So this is a grid. So getting a row, how would I get the row? How would I get, wait, hold on, let me change the values. Oh, hold on. That was stupid. 4, 5, 6, 9, 8, 7. Okay. So how do I get this row? 4, 5, 6. How do I get those values? I'd want you to, I'm going to console log 3 things, okay? 3 separate things. How do I access the 4? Grid bracket 1? Yes. So how do I get the 5? Oh, nope, not that, sorry. And then how would I get the 6? You get 4, 5, 6. So as you can see, what isn't changing? The first bracket, right? But the second bracket is changing. It's incrementing by 1 every time, right? Do you kind of see how a double for loop can be used to get that, right? I is staying the same the whole time, but j is incrementing by 1 every time. So when I is this, and we get every value in here, we get that row. How would I get a column? How do I get 2, 5, and 8?
0, 1, grid 0, 1,
Cool.
grid 1, 1,
Cool.
and 2, 1.
2, 5, 8. This is a little confusing. I understand that. But if you put it out like this, then it becomes a little less confusing. Because you can literally look, okay, this is at index 0, this array. This array is at index 1. This array is at index 1. So if grid at 0, and I want the last column, I could just do grid at 0 of 2. Grid at 1 of 2, grid at 3 of 2, okay? Because the first thing, will be incrementing by 1 every time. But the column, the y, is going to stay the same. I and j, x and y, grids and rows and columns. Any questions? This is just a little intro to a grid. I don't know. You know. Maybe it'll be useful for the project. I'm going to tell you about it at the end. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
Can we attach methods to this form? Like if we wanted to
What do you mean?
say split everything out.
Well, we can't split an array, right? We split strings.
Okay, yeah,
I mean, you could join all of these.
yeah, join.
I don't know what would happen if you joined a multi-dimensional array. Aha. So do you remember when I said I did join and I didn't pass anything into it, and we got the commas? That's pretty much what's happening here, right? We're getting the 1, 2, 3 with the commas, and then I'm putting the space in because that's the next index, you know? So like if I did, you know? And yeah, you can't really go deeper into that. Join doesn't work that way. Any other questions before I go into the slides? Slides? Slides?
Wait, why did,
Yeah.
Why did hello get logged twice in the join?
Because join does not go at the anything you pass into join as an argument does not go at the beginning or the end of the indexes. It goes in between the indexes. So there's three elements, right?
Yeah.
So it puts the first thing into the string, then the thing that you put into join goes after that.
Yeah.
Then it puts the next thing from the array into a string. Then it puts this thing after that. Then it puts the next thing into the string. But that was the last thing, so it doesn't put it a third time.
Okay.
It's separate. It's like, think of it as replacing the commas in an array, but everything's a string.
Yeah. Well, if you had an array that was just like strings and didn't have the brackets within that array, would the same thing happen? Or like if it was just bracket, string, 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 like would it only log in once or would it log in a bunch of different?
But they're like here. Let me just like
Just 3 strings, like anything random, Proto Sam. If you hit join with that, it doesn't like go in between every word, does it?
it does. Oh, what the hell am I doing? Right?
Alright, cool.
Think of it as replacing the commas, right? The things that are in between all of the indexes. So it takes the first thing, puts it into an empty string, takes the thing you passed in, and puts it at the end.
Oh, but if you split something out of that, it would just
Out of this,
out of the original.
split is for strings.
Yeah. Well, if you took out, what's the opposite? Is it split? Or if you had taken out worlds from that original.
If I took out world,
Yeah. Well, if you had.
oh, if I
done
spliced,
a previous split and then you hit like rejoin world, would it go?
oh. So if it's like, so if you're saying if it's like,
Because I thought I was messing around with it. I went back once and whatever I was doing. So it was just a different context.
so I split it off of world, space, right?
Yeah.
So that is taken out.
Yeah.
But then I'm joining it back, and I'm putting that back between the two things, right?
Yeah, because it changes.
Yeah, because there were 2 indexes in that array,
Okay.
0 and 1, because world was taken out, space.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. To the slides. Okay, so we're just going to talk about more methods and nested arrays. Heads up, I'm going to say everything I just did again. Okay? So let's first talk about splice. Splice mutates the original array. I can't say that enough times. You have to be aware of what is actually changing the original array and what is not. Okay? Splice is. And it's used to add or remove elements from the middle of an array, instead of adding or removing them from either end, like push, pop, unshift, and shift. Its first argument is an index. The second is a count of elements to delete from the element. And we're going to start at the providing index. And it returns a new array with all of the removed elements. So you have let names is an array of three things, right? George, John, and Thomas. And then we declare a new variable, and we're going to set that equal to names.splice, and we're going to pass in 1 and then 1. We console log names and we console log single term precedence. The reason why names is George Thomas is because we started at index 1 and we took out one thing, right? So John got taken out, so names is now two things, but single term precedence is a new variable in an array form, even though it's one thing, okay? It's not returning the value of everything, it's returning everything that it gets deleted in an array form. So even if it's one thing, even if there's no things, it's still going to be an array. Cool? Cool. So here's another example. So we have Paul, George, John, and Ringo, right? Let across the universe equal names.splice 1 of 2. Console log names across the universe, and then we see that we took out two things this time, right? We took out George and John from here because we started at index 1 and deleted two things, 1, 2. And we set that equal to another variable, and we get an array of 2. Makes sense, right? Cool. And you can optionally add new elements at the given index. So we say let names is Paul, George, Pete, and John, and we could say let former members equals names.splice 2, 1, Ringo. What is former members going to be?
All for Ringo John.
Just Pete. Former members is just going to be Pete, because splice returns a new array of the deleted things. Starting at index 2, 0, 1, 2, deleting one thing, Pete, doesn't matter about anything else. Just how many things we're deleting. That is what former members will be in an array. But if we console log names, we see that Ringo is where Pete used to be. Because Ringo is going to be put in at index 2, 0, 1, Ringo. 0, 1, Ringo. Does that make sense? Any questions about splice? Any questions about splice? Any questions about splice? No? Cool. Okay. Oh, there's more splice. Okay. You don't have to remove any elements. I did show you this briefly. So like, if we're just saying start at index 2, remove 0 elements, but then I have two things over here. That means that at index 2, 0, 1, 2, where now 0, 1, 2 is no longer Ringo, we got Pete and Stuart, and then Ringo and John. But since splice returns an array of the deleted elements, and we deleted nothing, all it does is return an empty array. That makes sense, right? Logically, that makes sense. Correct? It's always going to return an array of deleted items. If you don't delete any items, it just returns an empty array because there are no items. But you could still add things at that index. And the first thing you pass in, the first argument of splice, is the index of where to start. Cool? Cool. Join. Okay, so join concatenates the elements of an array into a string. The original array is not changed. Okay? So if we have let names Paul, George, John, Ringo, and let join string equals names.join, and we console log type of join string and console log join string, you get string, and then you get a string where everything's a comma in between everything that was in the array, which is usually something that you wouldn't want, right? Because why would you want that? So you can add a separator, okay? And the separator basically says that, okay, in between each of the indexes of the array, we're going to put this thing. So we're going to do Paul, and then we're going to put this thing. Then we're going to do George, then we're going to put this thing. In between, not at the beginning and the end, just in between all of the elements. So you get Paul and George and John and Ringo. This makes sense, right? Likewise, if I put an empty string here, they would just all be shut together with no commas. Okay? Then we have the concat method. Concat merges two or more arrays into one. And I guess you saw that you can also put other things in there too. That I didn't know, because I don't know why I would do that. So it returns a new array and doesn't change the array on which it was called. Let older equal Ringo John. Let younger equal Paul George. Let altogether now equals older.concat younger. Console log altogether now, and then older. You see, older has not been mutated, but it does return a new array of everything combined. Let's say that instead of John, it was an array of John and George. Okay? I don't think it doesn't go deep into the array. Concat that when I say deep, I mean it doesn't go into the array if it finds another array. Okay? What it would be is one array, like this is one array, this is one array, and it would make it one array, but that value in here would still be an array. Okay? Because it's shallow. It's not deep, it's shallow. Does that make sense? Okay. But if you have two arrays that are two different variables and you want them to be one array, that's what you do. And the thing you pass into it will be put on the back of the thing you're dotting off of. So you do older dot concat younger. The thing that is older is Ringo John, right? And you see Ringo John is first. And then you're dot concat younger, and then younger is last at the end. Makes sense, right?
So how would you like flatten the array if it was like Ringo, array John, George, and Paul? That's a different array?
You would have to write a function, a special function to do that. Any questions on concat? Concat. Concat. Cool. So let's talk about nested arrays. Arrays can contain any type of value, including other arrays. And we could see here, we have an array with two things. Related things has a length of 2. At index 0, it's an array, Windows, Mac OS. And at index 1, it's an array, New York, Chicago. Okay? So console.log related things at 0. And then we say console.log related things at 1 at 0. Related things at 1 at 0. Makes sense, right? Windows, Mac OS in an array, New York, 2. Who is confused by this? It's important that you guys understand how to access things in a nested array, how to access variables in a nested array. Not variables, but like values. Is anybody confused by this? It makes sense, right? Like you take the thing, it's at 1, right? And what that is an array. And that has indexes too. So you just put another one at the end. at whatever index you want to access, right? So then, then you would get New York. Yeah?
0, 0 being Windows.
0, 0 would be Windows. 0, 1 would be Mac OS. 1, 0, 1, 1. How does that feel? Has nested arrays to you guys. Okay? They're not too bad, but it can get confusing. So here's an example of looping through a nested array. So you have let RSVP groups. Okay? So we have an array of 3 things, right? Why are there 3 things? Because the first thing at index 0 is 1 array. The second thing at index 1 is 1 string. And the third thing at index 2 is another array. It doesn't matter that these have different lengths, they're still 1 array, so the length of RSVP groups is still 3. So let's say I wanted to get every value out of here. Let I equal 0. I is equal to RSVP groups.length, which is 3. And then we're going to increment I every time. Let element equal RSVP groups of I. We are not sure if this is an array or a string, okay? Because you see, here's an array, and here's a string, and here's an array. So we can do this if statement. If array.isArray, pass in the element, right? We're saying let element equal to RSVP groups at I. That means that element will be the current element we're at, right? In the for loop, in the outer for loop. Then we can check if that element is an array. And if it is, we write another for loop. For let j equal 0. J is less than that element's length, because that element is an array. J plus plus. And we say let name equal element at j, and then we console.log name. Else, we console.log the element. This is the same thing I showed you with the fellowship, right? This is the same thing. And remember how I said like let j, right? If this was I, inside of this for loop, you can no longer access this number. You can no longer access the outer index. Why? Because it looks at its own scope before it goes up 1, right? So if I said let I here, which wouldn't throw an error because you can do that, and I was saying there was an outer grid, and I wanted to say and we're getting like a column, right? Here I would say let I of j, right? But like if there was an I, what would you do? Let I of I? It would always be referencing this thing. It would always be referencing this I. Because it looks in its own scope, finds a variable that has a value, and then it doesn't look anymore. That's why if you have double for loops, you should always rename the indicator. I to j to y. Some people do k. You know? Does that make sense? Okay. It's also just going to be, just like wouldn't work, you know? You would lose access to this value. Like, what did you do? Like, grid at I, right? That doesn't make any sense. That would never be what you're actually looking for. Here's an example of a grid. So you can use nested arrays to represent a grid in code, and inner arrays represent the rows of the grid, and each index of the row represents a column, right? So if I did let first column equal grid at 0, grid at 0 at 0, and then grid at 1 at 0, and then grid at 2 at 0, you would get the first column. Because grid at 0 at 0, grid at 0 at 0. Grid at 1 at 0. Grid 0, 1 at 0. Grid at 2 at 0. 0, 1, 2 at 0. To get a specific column, the second bracket, the y, has to be constant, right? Because the y, the index of the inner arrays, represents the column. So to get one column, that index has to be the same. But what has to change? The row. Right? Does that make sense? Does that make sort of sense? A little bit sense. Any response? Cool. Thank you. So recap, we talked about more methods and nested arrays. And now I'm going to talk about the 100% optional project that you guys have to do, okay? And I think it's due Thursday. No, not this Thursday, like next Thursday. But honestly, you guys can do this whenever you want, and you can always Slack me your solutions, even though I won't be seeing you after Thursday, which is really sad. I'm still sad about that. Okay? But you can always Slack me your solution. You can Slack me your solution in 2022. Okay, it's fine. I'll probably answer it. Probably won't remember you, but I'll answer. Just kidding. I'll always remember you guys. So this is 100% optional. You don't need to do this. But I definitely strongly recommend you do this because this will strengthen your programming skills. Because what this project is really designed to do is having you write a lot of functions with a little bit of complex logic, and it's really going to strengthen your understanding of arrays and how they really work. Okay. So yeah, it's good practice building a slightly larger program. Instructions are going to be available in the extra workshop on LearnDot. And don't forget to write tidy code and send your solution to me. And you can also send them to Robin. Okay? Robin will be your instructor on Monday. He's cool. Don't worry about it. Not as cool as... No, I'm just kidding. All right, yeah, that's it. So I will open up that workshop at the same time I open up Arrays 2. And you guys could just read through it and... talk to me privately if you have any questions, okay? Any questions before you take a 5-minute break? Cool. Go take a break.